The black Mercedes pulled through the imposing gates of Balmoral Castle as the Scottish morning mist clung to the heather-covered hills. Sarah Mitchell gripped the leather seat, her knuckles white against the dark upholstery. Just 48 hours ago, she had been a backbench MP fighting for housing reforms in her London constituency. Now, she was about to become the youngest Prime Minister in British history. The constitutional crisis had erupted like a summer storm. Prime Minister Jonathan Hartwell had collapsed during a heated debate in Parliament, his heart giving way under the pressure of months of political turmoil. The leadership contest that followed was swift and brutal, with party heavyweights eliminating each other in a series of devastating scandals that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Sarah had entered the race almost as an afterthought, pushed by a handful of younger MPs who believed the party needed fresh blood. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from advisors, journalists, and world leaders. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. She thought about her grandmother, who had cleaned the floors of Parliament during the war, never imagining her granddaughter would one day lead the nation from those same chambers. The castle loomed ahead, its gray stone towers reaching toward the cloudy sky. Sarah had studied the constitutional procedures extensively during law school, but the reality felt surreal. In less than an hour, she would kneel before Queen Elizabeth II and receive the formal invitation to form a government. The ritual, unchanged for centuries, would transform her from a constituency MP into the most powerful person in Britain. Her private secretary, James Whitmore, sat across from her reviewing the protocol one final time. "Remember, you're soon-to-be Prime Minister," he said with nervous humor. "The Queen will ask if you can form a government. You simply answer, 'Yes, Your Majesty, I believe I can.'" Sarah nodded, though her throat felt dry. The constitutional monarchy meant that real power flowed through ancient ceremonies that most citizens never witnessed. As the car rounded the final curve, Sarah caught her first glimpse of the Queen's standard flying above the castle. Her Majesty was in residence, waiting to perform a duty she had carried out 15 times before during her long reign. The thought both comforted and terrified Sarah. This was bigger than party politics or personal ambition. This was about the continuation of democratic government itself. The vehicle stopped at the main entrance, where a small group of officials waited in formal dress. Sarah took a deep breath, straightened her navy suit jacket, and stepped out into the crisp Highland air. The next few hours would determine not just her own future, but the direction of the entire country. As she walked toward the ancient doors of Balmoral, Sarah Mitchell carried with her the hopes and fears of 67 million people who were depending on her to lead them through uncertain times. The castle's interior was exactly as she had imagined from countless photographs and documentaries. Rich tapestries lined the walls, and the scent of old wood and Highland heather filled the air. Royal staff members moved with quiet efficiency, their faces revealing nothing of their thoughts about the young woman who was about to assume the highest office in the land. Sir Edward Pemberton, the Queen's private secretary, greeted Sarah with a formal bow. "Prime Minister-elect Mitchell, Her Majesty is ready to receive you in the morning room." His voice carried the weight of centuries of tradition. Sarah followed him through corridors lined with portraits of previous monarchs, each one a reminder of the unbroken chain of constitutional government that she was about to join. At the door to the morning room, Sir Edward paused. "A moment of history awaits, Prime Minister," he said quietly. Sarah nodded, her heart pounding as she prepared to meet the woman who had guided Britain through 7 decades of unprecedented change. The future of the nation lay just beyond that door. The morning room at Balmoral was smaller than Sarah had expected, filled with comfortable furniture and family photographs that made it feel more like a country sitting room than a place where constitutional history was made. Sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking the castle gardens, where ancient oak trees stood sentinel over perfectly manicured lawns. Queen Elizabeth II rose from her chair as Sarah entered, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. At 97, the monarch moved with careful dignity, her bright blue eyes alert and penetrating. She wore a simple tweed skirt and cardigan in shades of purple and gray, with her signature three-strand pearl necklace. The informality of her dress contrasted sharply with the momentous nature of the occasion. "Miss Mitchell," the Queen said, her voice carrying the refined accent that had become synonymous with royal broadcasts for generations. "Please do sit down." She gestured to a floral-patterned armchair positioned across from her own. The absence of cameras or recording devices made the moment feel intensely private, despite its constitutional significance. Sarah sat carefully, her mind racing through the protocol she had memorized. The Queen's corgis, Muick and Sandy, lay contentedly by the fireplace, occasionally raising their heads to observe the proceedings with mild interest. The domestic scene belied the gravity of what was about to unfold. "I understand you've had quite a remarkable few days," the Queen observed, settling back into her chair. Her tone was conversational, almost grandmotherly, yet Sarah could sense the sharp intelligence behind every word. Rising from the backbench to party leadership is no small feat, particularly given the circumstances. The Constitutional Convention required the Queen to remain politically neutral, but Sarah detected a note of curiosity in her voice. After 7 decades on the throne, Elizabeth II had worked with 15 prime ministers, from Winston Churchill to Jonathan Hartwell. Each transition had brought its own challenges and revelations about the nature of British democracy. "Your Majesty, I'm deeply honored by the confidence my party has shown in me," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I understand the enormous responsibility that comes with this role, particularly during such turbulent times." She paused, then added, "I hope I can serve the country with the same dedication you've shown throughout your reign." The Queen's expression softened slightly. "Prime ministers come to this office through many different paths, my dear. Some through long political careers, others through unexpected circumstances. What matters is not how one arrives, but what one does with the opportunity." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense. "The country is facing significant challenges both domestically and internationally. The economic situation remains precarious, and our international relationships require careful navigation." Sarah nodded, appreciating the Queen's indirect way of acknowledging the complexity of the current political landscape. The constitutional crisis that had brought her to power was just one symptom of deeper problems facing the nation. Rising inflation, social unrest in several major cities, and tensions with European partners over trade agreements had created a perfect storm of challenges. "I've been thinking a great deal about the role of government in people's daily lives," Sarah said carefully. "Too often, politics feels distant from the real struggles families face paying their bills, finding decent housing, or securing good health care. I believe we need to rebuild trust between government and citizens." The Queen listened intently, her decades of experience evident in how she weighed each word. "Trust is indeed fragile," she agreed. "It takes years to build and moments to destroy. The British people have endured much uncertainty recently. They need leadership that is both steady and responsive to their concerns." Through the windows, Sarah could see groundskeepers tending to the estate's famous gardens. The continuity of such work, generation after generation, struck her as a metaphor for the constitutional monarchy itself. While governments rose and fell, the crown remained a constant presence, providing stability in times of upheaval. A discreet knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Sir Edward entered quietly, carrying a leather folder containing the official documents that would formalize Sarah's appointment. The ceremonial aspect of the transition was about to begin, transforming their thoughtful discussion into a moment of constitutional law. "Shall we proceed with the formalities?" the Queen asked, rising gracefully from her chair. Sarah stood as well, her pulse quickening as the reality of the moment settled over her. In the next few minutes, she would officially become Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, with all the powers and responsibilities that entailed. The Queen moved to a small writing desk positioned near the window, where the afternoon light would illuminate the documents they were about to sign. Sarah followed, her footsteps silent on the thick Persian carpet. The weight of history pressed around them as they prepared to enact a ritual that connected them to centuries of British constitutional tradition. The leather folder contained documents that had been prepared in the precise calligraphy required for all official royal correspondence. Sir Edward opened it carefully, revealing the formal commission that would authorize Sarah Mitchell to form a new government. The parchment was cream-colored and heavy, bearing the royal seal in deep red wax. Queen Elizabeth II stood beside the writing desk with the composed dignity that had characterized her entire reign. The afternoon light, streaming through the windows, caught the subtle sparkle of her diamond brooch, a piece that had belonged to Queen Victoria and was worn only for the most significant state occasions. The choice was deliberate, connecting this moment to the long line of constitutional monarchs who had overseen the peaceful transfer of power. "Miss Mitchell," the Queen began formally, her voice taking on the ceremonial tone required by protocol, "I invite you to form a government in my name." The words, though spoken in her familiar voice, carried the weight of constitutional law. This was the moment when theoretical political science became practical governance, when campaign promises transformed into governmental responsibility. Sarah felt her hands tremble slightly as she replied, "Your Majesty, I humbly accept your invitation and believe I can form a government that will serve the people of the United Kingdom." The response, practiced numerous times during her preparation, now carried real consequence. With those words, she accepted responsibility for the lives and welfare of millions of people. The Queen gestured toward the documents spread before them. "The commission requires both our signatures," she explained, lifting an ornate fountain pen that bore the royal cipher. Her signature, Elizabeth R., was written with the flowing script she had perfected over decades of state business. The R stood for Regina, Latin for Queen, a reminder of the ancient traditions that still govern modern Britain. Sarah took the pen, its weight substantial in her hand. Her signature looked small and uncertain beneath the Queen's confident script, but it was legally binding nonetheless. With that simple act, the constitutional machinery of government shifted into motion. Cabinet ministers would now report to her, civil servants would implement her policies, and military commanders would take her orders. Sir Edward stepped forward to witness the signing, adding his own signature to complete the legal requirements. The ritual, unchanged since the 18th century, had now been completed for the 16th time during Queen Elizabeth's reign. Each transition brought its own personality and priorities, but the constitutional framework remained constant. "Prime Minister Mitchell," the Queen said, using Sarah's new title for the first time, "you now hold the office that Winston Churchill once described as the most powerful position in our democracy. The weight of that responsibility is considerable, but so too are the resources and support available to you." The reality of her new status began to sink in as Sarah considered what awaited her back in London. Her first cabinet meeting was scheduled for the following morning, where she would need to address the economic crisis that had contributed to her predecessor's downfall. International leaders were already requesting urgent conversations about trade agreements and security partnerships that could not wait for a lengthy transition period. Through the windows, Sarah could see her security detail waiting by the official cars that would take her back to London. The Prime Minister's protection officers were among the most highly trained personnel in the British security services, a reminder that her life was now considered vital to national security. The freedom of movement she had enjoyed as a backbench MP was gone forever. "Your Majesty," Sarah said, "might I ask for your guidance on how to approach the challenges ahead? You've worked with 15 prime ministers, each facing their own crises and opportunities. What wisdom can you share about leading in difficult times?" The Queen considered the question carefully, her expression thoughtful. Each prime minister brings their own strengths and perspectives to the role. Some excel at grand strategy, others at detailed administration. The key is to surround yourself with advisors who complement your abilities and who will tell you difficult truths when necessary. She paused, then continued, "The British people are remarkably resilient, but They need to feel that their government understands their daily struggles. Never lose touch with the concerns of ordinary families, even when global events demand your attention. The crown provides continuity, but government must provide hope and practical solutions. The conversation was interrupted by another discreet knock. Sir Edward announced that the official photographer was ready to document the historic appointment. The image would be released to the press and would become part of the official record, marking the moment when Sarah Mitchell became the United Kingdom's newest prime minister. As they prepared for the photograph, Sarah felt a profound sense of connection to the democratic traditions that had brought her to this moment. The peaceful transfer of power, conducted with dignity and ceremony, represented everything she hoped to preserve and strengthen during her time in office. The camera captured them standing together beside the Sign Commission, the Queen's steady presence lending legitimacy to Sarah's untested leadership. Outside, the Highland landscape stretched toward distant mountains, unchanged by the political drama unfolding within the castle walls. The timeless beauty of Scotland provided a fitting backdrop for a ceremony that bridged past and future, tradition and change. After the formal ceremony concluded and the photographer departed, Queen Elizabeth II invited her new prime minister to join her for tea in the castle's private sitting room. This informal continuation of their meeting was not required by constitutional protocol, but it represented a personal tradition the Queen had maintained with each of her prime ministers during their first appointment. The sitting room was even more intimate than the morning room, filled with personal mementos and family photographs that revealed glimpses of the woman behind the crown. Pictures of Prince Philip, her children, and grandchildren created a domestic atmosphere that few people beyond the royal family ever experienced. Sarah felt privileged to witness this more human side of the monarchy. I always find these initial conversations helpful, the Queen explained as she poured tea from a china service decorated with Scottish thistles. The formal ceremony is necessary, of course, but real understanding develops through quieter moments. Her movements were practiced and graceful, the result of hosting thousands of such occasions throughout her reign. Sarah accepted the delicate teacup, noting how the Queen's hands remained steady despite her advanced age. The monarch's longevity and mental acuity were often taken for granted, but sitting across from her, Sarah was struck by the remarkable nature of a woman who had served as head of state for over 7 decades while maintaining such obvious intelligence and engagement. Your Majesty, I must confess that I feel somewhat overwhelmed by the speed of recent events, Sarah admitted. 2 weeks ago, I was focused on local housing issues in my constituency. Now I'm responsible for national economic policy and international relations. The learning curve feels impossibly steep. The Queen smiled knowingly. I remember my own sudden elevation to unexpected responsibility, though admittedly under very different circumstances. When my father died, I was 25 years old and on safari in Kenya. One moment, I was Princess Elizabeth. The next, I was Queen of 16 independent nations. The weight of that transition never truly leaves you. The parallel between their experiences struck Sarah forcefully. Both women had been thrust into roles they had not fully prepared for, though the Queen's burden had been far greater and more permanent. The constitutional monarchy meant that while prime ministers could resign or be voted out, the Queen's commitment was lifelong and absolute. The key, the Queen continued, is to remember that you are not expected to have all the answers immediately. Good government depends on gathering wise counsel and making decisions based on the best available information. Trust in the constitutional system that supports you, but never lose sight of your obligation to the people who depend on your leadership. Through the windows, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the estate grounds. Sarah could see staff members going about their daily routines, maintaining the castle and ground with the same attention to detail that had preserved Balmoral for generations. The continuity of such work provided a metaphor for the broader continuity of British institutions. I've been thinking about the balance between stability and change, Sarah said, setting down her teacup. The country clearly needs reforms to address economic inequality and social division, but people also crave predictability after so much recent upheaval. How does one navigate between those competing needs? The Queen considered the question carefully, her expression thoughtful. Change is inevitable in any society, but the pace and manner of change matter enormously. Revolutionary change often creates more problems than it solves, while excessive caution can allow serious problems to fester. The art of governance lies in finding the middle path that addresses real needs without destroying valuable traditions. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah's principal private secretary, who needed to brief her on urgent matters requiring immediate attention. A crisis had erupted in the Middle East involving British expatriates, and several international leaders were requesting urgent consultations about the economic implications. The reality of 24-hour global responsibility was already asserting itself. "Duty calls, I see," the Queen observed with understanding. "Before you go, allow me to offer one final piece of advice. Never underestimate the importance of your weekly audiences with me. They provide an opportunity for frank discussion away from the pressures of partisan politics and media scrutiny. I have found these conversations valuable with all of your predecessors." Sarah stood, feeling the weight of immediate responsibilities settling on her shoulders. The private moments with the Queen had provided an invaluable perspective on the role she was assuming, but now the practical demands of governance required her attention. The transition from constitutional ceremony to active leadership was beginning in earnest. As they walked toward the sitting room door, the Queen paused beside a photograph of herself with Winston Churchill, taken during the early years of her reign. "He once told me that the office of Prime Minister was like drinking from a fire hose while riding a bicycle," she said with subtle humor. "I suspect you'll understand that metaphor quite well in the coming weeks." The comparison brought a genuine smile to Sarah's face for the first time since entering Balmoral. The Queen's ability to combine dignity with humanity, formality with warmth, provided a model for her own approach to leadership. She would need to find ways to remain accessible and authentic while bearing the enormous responsibilities of office. Sir Edward appeared to escort Sarah back to her waiting convoy, but the Queen accompanied them to the castle's main entrance. This gesture of personal attention was not lost on Sarah, who understood that she had been welcomed into a unique relationship that transcended normal political arrangements. The constitutional monarchy created a bond between crown and government that would support her throughout her tenure as Prime Minister. The convoy of black vehicles wound its way through the Scottish Highlands as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Sarah Mitchell sat in the back seat of the armored Jaguar, no longer the nervous MP who had arrived at Balmoral that morning. She was now officially the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, with all the authority and responsibility that title carried. Her phone had not stopped buzzing since leaving the castle. Messages flooded in from world leaders, party colleagues, and family members who were still processing the remarkable transformation of their daughter, sister, and friend into one of the most powerful political figures in the world. The congratulations were mixed with urgent requests for meetings, decisions on pending legislation, and responses to developing international crises that could not wait for a conventional transition period. James Whitmore sat beside her, frantically organizing the avalanche of communications into categories of urgency. "The American president wants to speak with you within the next 6 hours," he reported. "The German chancellor has requested a video call tomorrow morning about the trade negotiations. And your mother has called 17 times asking if you remember to eat proper meals." Despite the overwhelming nature of her new responsibilities, Sarah found herself smiling at her mother's priorities. Margaret Mitchell had raised 3 children while working as a nurse in Manchester, and her practical concerns about nutrition transcended even the highest offices of government. Some relationships and truths remained constant regardless of political elevation. The landscape rushing past the car windows reminded Sarah of family holidays to Scotland when she was young. Her father had been passionate about hiking and had instilled in his children a love for the dramatic beauty of the Highlands. Those memories felt simultaneously distant and immediate as she contemplated the enormous changes that had transformed her life in just a few days. "Prime Minister," James said, using her new title with careful precision, "we need to discuss your first cabinet appointments. Several senior party members are expecting calls tonight about their positions. The Chancellor of the Exchequer role is particularly urgent, given tomorrow's emergency economic briefing." Sarah nodded, though part of her mind remained focused on her conversation with Queen Elizabeth II. The monarch's advice about surrounding herself with advisors who would speak difficult truths resonated strongly. Too many political careers have been destroyed by leaders who isolated themselves within circles of agreement and flattery. She needed ministers who would challenge her assumptions and provide honest assessments of policy options. As they approached the outskirts of Edinburgh, Sarah could see the city's ancient castle illuminated against the darkening sky. The sight reminded her of the deep historical roots of the political system she now led. From the medieval kingdoms of Scotland and England to the modern democratic state, the evolution of British governance had been shaped by countless individuals who had faced moments of crucial decision. Her secure phone rang with a call from the cabinet secretary, Britain's most senior civil servant, who needed to brief her on several classified matters that required immediate prime ministerial attention. The conversation was a stark reminder that her new role involved secrets and responsibilities that she could share with no one outside the highest levels of government. "There's a developing situation in the South China Sea that may require a response from the Royal Navy," the cabinet secretary explained in measured tones. "The Foreign Secretary has prepared a briefing document, but the decision ultimately rests with you as Prime Minister." The weight of potentially placing British military personnel in danger settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. The convoy entered London as the city's evening rush hour reached its peak. Through the tinted windows, Sarah could see ordinary people making their way home from work, unaware that their new prime minister was passing just meters away. Their daily struggles with housing costs, healthcare waiting times, and job security would soon become her primary focus as she worked to translate political promises into practical policies. Downing Street had been secured hours earlier in preparation for her arrival. Police barriers held back crowds of journalists and curious onlookers who hoped to catch a glimpse of Britain's youngest ever prime minister. Camera crews from around the world had established positions to capture her first moments as the occupant of number 10. As the convoy turned into Whitehall, Sarah could see the familiar black door that had been the entrance to power for over 3 centuries. Every prime minister since Robert Walpole had walked through that door to begin their tenure in office. Some had left as celebrated statesmen, others in disgrace or defeat, but all had contributed to the continuous evolution of British democracy. The car stopped directly in front of number 10, and Sarah took a moment to compose herself before stepping into the glare of media attention. Her first public words as prime minister would be scrutinized and analyzed around the world. She had prepared remarks during the journey from Balmoral, but the emotional weight of the moment made her reconsider her planned speech. As she stepped out of the car, the crowd of reporters surged forward behind the police barriers. Flash photography lit up the early evening darkness as she walked the few steps to the most famous door in British politics. Sarah paused at the threshold, her hand on the brass knocker that bore the number 10, and turned to face the assembled media. "Today, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II invited me to form a government in her name," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the street. "I'm deeply honored by the trust placed in me by my parliamentary colleagues and humbled by the responsibility I now bear to all the people of the United Kingdom." The words carried across television networks and social media platforms, marking the beginning of a new chapter in British political history. Behind her, the door to number 10, Downing Street, stood open, waiting to receive its new occupant. Inside, civil servants, advisors, and security personnel were ready to support her in the enormous task ahead. The constitutional ceremony at Balmoral was now complete, but the real work of governing a nation in turbulent times was just beginning.